Welcome to the 75th episode of the Hail Married podcast. I'm A. Tobes, and I'm joined by my husband, the Tobes. We're back to give a mid-season update on UTSA basketball. Let's get started. Now that we're a little past halfway through the season, we thought it would be a good time to reflect on where we're at now and, kind of see where we think the teams should go for the rest of the season.
Yeah, so currently the women are 10-8 overall. They're 4-3 in conference. The men are 7-12 overall. They're 1-5 in conference. I think if you look at both teams, there's been some good things. And I think if you're looking at it from the outside and maybe haven't really been paying attention, so you're just kind of box score watching or, just looking at records every now and then to see how the teams are going, maybe you're missing out on some of those good things that, we're referring to here. Now, admittedly, I think both teams still have some areas to clean up, but, I would say, I think starting this off, that there's probably a few more good things than bad things for each team.
Certainly.
All right, so let's get started first with the women's team, okay? Because I think that's the team that's really got, the most bright spots to this point.
Right.
Did you think, if I told you before the season that this team would be 10-8 overall and 4-3 in conference without Jordan Jenkins even taking the floor?
I would not have believed it. I thought surely that Jordan would be back by now.
Right.
Based on what we'd heard. And if she wasn't, I definitely would have imagined more struggles, particularly in conference.
Yeah, and I think that's been the interesting part to this, right? Because there's been a grittiness to this team as Coach Aston has kind of referred to them. And, since the last time we updated the team, we talked about this 4-3 conference record. They lost to Temple, lost to East Carolina. They went on a 4-game winning streak by beating Wichita State, FAU, Charlotte, South Florida, and then lost a heartbreaker yesterday to UAB. One that I think they're really going to rue the day, that the fact that they let that one slip out to UAB and Birmingham. But, overall, just because you're seeing the 4-3 record, obviously there's going to probably be some improvements if you have, Jordan Jenkins.
Right.
We would imagine. But this team has really grown without her, right?
Definitely. I think one of the things, as you kind of look at the season, there's two things that stick out to me. One is maturity, and one is mental and physical toughness. And if you think back to the non-conference schedule, you saw that with the Houston game where they had dug themselves a hole early, and then they were able to come back and almost win that game.
Right.
But if you look at it in terms of conference play, I think the biggest illustration is that Charlotte game and then the turnaround to the South Florida game.
Yeah, it's a good point because it really was. They put a lot of effort into that Charlotte game, which ended up being a double overtime win, and then turned around 2 days later to play what was essentially the regular season champion last year for the AAC in South Florida, and a team that was essentially returning some players. They're still a little bit young in some areas, but they got a lot of good size. It really felt like they had a little more length and athleticism than UTSA, yet we persisted again and found a way to win, and they really came out the gate and just, it's like they were on turbo the entire time.
Sure.
I think we both were impressed with the fact that they came out, pressed South Florida. They were eating some baskets by going to the hoop. They were shooting well from outside. So when you have shots falling and you're playing pretty good defense, it's usually a recipe for good. And in this case, it ended up being a recipe for a blowout. Really, South Florida really was never in the game. Even when they crept it, I think it was 12 or 10 points later in the game. It just never felt like South Florida had enough juice to come back.
Yeah, and when we were watching that UAB game, it started out that way where we just came out kind of turbocharged, like you mentioned, but unfortunately in that one we ran out of gas. It was like we had these two really great games back to back, but we just didn't quite have enough juice for the third game. We let UAB kind of hang around too much, and then, unfortunately they were able to come back and win right at the last minute.
Well, some of those threes that were falling against USF and even against Charlotte weren't falling in this one, and it just felt like it was a little lackadaisical. But looking at the entire season now, you look at offensively, they've improved overall their three-point shooting. I mean, it's only up 2 percentage points, but I'll argue this, is that not having Jordan Jenkins doesn't give you the open threes that you would have had with her presence there. So, it's a little more impressive that they're doing something like that. And then their scoring average was also up slightly when it came to before this UAB game. And again, impressive because you've now had to find or had to have different players fill that void that Jordan Jenkins had. So, a few good things happening on offense, but where I think it's much more impressive has been the defensive end.
Right.
They have lowered their opponent's overall shooting percentage and their 3-point shooting percentage, which has lowered the points per game. I mean, and that to me has been the impressive part.
Right.
I don't know that you would think Jordan Jenkins elite defender or anything, but you know that she's still going to provide a presence there. But the fact that this team has really, going back to one of the things he said, the maturity to go and challenge shots, to really make sure that these opponents aren't able to get comfortable. Some of it's Coach Aston. Loves to change up that defense, whether it's her coaching staff. All together, I think this team has done some really good things, has been showing that improvement. And really, starting from that first time that we saw this team, Coach Aston's first season, you saw that they were going to play hard and they were going to give it all they had the entire time. A little reminiscent of the football team, right? Like maximum or full effort every single play. But back then, it just didn't feel like you had the talent. Now you feel like you're getting that talent, and it's really filling in nicely.
Which, I mean, if you look at some of their stats nationally, they're 17th in blocks per game in the country and 18th in field goal percentage defense. I mean, that's huge. I mean, we're not just talking about conference, stats. We're talking about 17th and 18th in the country.
And, it's times like that when you start seeing those stats, you start reminding yourself of like the football team when you saw that team kind of beginning to elevate itself.
Right.
You started seeing them all of a sudden ranked in some of these categories, offensive and defensively, and you see that with this women's team. So let's go into some of the bright spots or some of the players that we've seen. Mm-hmm. Let's start out with actually Kira White, one of the veterans. She's always been a streaky shooter, but she's always been this sort of, to me, like Swiss Army knife. If you need to get the offense going, she can do that. If you need to get like a clutch basket, she certainly can either make it happen some way, whether it's her, again, dishing off or whether it's her taking it to the hoop. But I think what's been most impressive this year, it's been her defense.
Right.
When, they played Charlotte, Dazia Lawrence is a really good guard that plays for Charlotte and had been, I think, second in the league in scoring. Dazia had lit up a bunch of other teams, but when it came down, especially crunch time for this UTSA team, Coach Aston had Kira on Dazia and made it very difficult for Dazia Lawrence to get comfortable offensively, and that was huge. Again, maturity from some of these veterans as well.
Yeah, I was going to say Alyssa Coleman is the one that has stuck out to me. She used to frustrate me at times when I would watch her play, because she's one of those people that wears her emotions on her sleeve, or at least she used to wear her emotions on her sleeves. And so you could see her in these games getting frustrated, and then you'd see her start to, get into foul trouble because she would get a little frustrated and sloppy, and it just almost like it snowballed at times.
Yeah.
But now you really see a different maturity from her. She's kind of keeps her emotions in check. I'm sure there's times that she's been absolutely frustrated, but you don't see it on her face the way that you used to. And that's part of the advantage of us having, seats that are so close to the court, is that we can really see, kind of the emotion on these girls' faces as they're playing. And she's really been able to kind of keep that game face on. And I think that's really helped her. I mean, yeah, she's still gotten an occasional foul trouble, but it really hasn't been as prevalent as it's been in the past. And then when you talk about her defense, she's been leading the conference in blocks and blocks per game.
Agreed. I think her composure, to your point, has been what's been key to some of these veterans and the way that they have helped this team continue to mature. And Alyssa being sort of a force, she went on this little run, during conference play where she was just unstoppable offensively, defensively. It just felt like she really couldn't do any wrong. And it just feels like every single time there's a different player, right? Somebody's like kind of going off, but to see that growth in Alyssa has definitely, I think, you made a good point of bringing her up, has been great. As has Sydney Love. Sydney Love has done a really good job this year. I think she's, I think we forget last season, she had sort of she was out for a little while because of an injury. Mm-hmm. But this season she seemed to have been a little bit more focused in terms of making sure to get this team sort of in an offensive rhythm. And I think that's been huge because you need that kind of guard to have that mentality of how do we get it to solve some of these defensive questions that the opponent throws at us, right? And to me, she's done that. And I think the only area that she needs to continue to work on is being a little savvier defensively, because you mentioned Alyssa, kind of losing her composure probably the last couple seasons, and this season kind of solving that. I think Sydney needs to solve that because she gets a little aggressive, but I mean it's not a bad aggressive, but she also gets a little too sloppy in terms of it. She kind of sticks her hand in a little too much, sticks her body a little too much. This team is very aggressive defensively, but I think there's got to be a line between being too aggressive and kind of committing silly fouls. And the main thing here is that we need Sydney Love to be on the court.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like it's clear that we need her to continue to grow and continue to get that experience. And if we don't have her on the court, it puts a little more pressure on Kira White to have to get the offense going. So it doesn't stop at the veterans though. Can we talk real quick about Adara Udo?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she has just been a standout. It was interesting when we went back and we were looking at, what were the notes that Hugh had written about her for our podcast when we were, talking about her signing with UTSA. And, you had made some good observations, but then you'd also said, hey, I'm not sure that she's going to see a lot of time, on the court as a freshman. Oh, boy, were you wrong.
Yeah. And a lot of it was because I thought that, obviously we have Jordan Jenkins, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't until afterwards I was like, okay, well, how does she fit in though? Like what is that going to look like? The thing is that I think her style of play, or I wouldn't say just her style of play, I would say actually her overall play, she's forced her way on the court. Mm-hmm. I think even if Jordan Jenkins was playing, you'd see Adara having time on the court because she's just played that well. She's shown this knack defensively to just put her hand up at the right time just to challenge a shot. Now, much like Sydney, at times she kind of goes into a shooter, especially with her lower body, and that's what you mostly called. But, again, she's a freshman, so you kind of expect her to make some freshman mistakes. But throughout this whole season, even when I watch her play, it's never ever really looked like, the game's going too fast for her. We always talk about that. A new player comes in, is the game too fast for them?
Right.
With Adara, it feels like it doesn't feel like it's really fast, but it also, you can tell that there's still some growth there that she needs to make.
Sure.
But if you need a key rebound, if you need a key basket, just near the hoop, it's her.
I mean, game-winning shot against Charlotte, it was her.
The funny part about that one was that I didn't think that she was surrounded. Okay, there was a few defenders around her. Somehow she found the ball. And I make it sound like it's just kind of luck, but it wasn't. She just was in the right position, and that's just Adara. She just seems to be in the right position, and that's how she makes these plays. So, one of the good freshmen that we have this season, another good one, Asia Proctor.
Yeah.
Asia's one that I thought when I first, and I really hadn't seen much video on her, so I was trying to figure out what to expect from her. I didn't think we'd get outside shooting. That wasn't really something that, to me, that from the limited amount of video I saw, that was really highlighted. But she has been key, whether it's coming off the bench early or starting. as a freshman, providing some of the outside shooting, providing athleticism. She just has this smooth way to her game. Now, I will say with Asia, though, she has a weird stance when she shoots, especially from the three-point line, where she's right-handed, but she kind of positions her body with like her right foot near the three-point line, but her left foot kind of almost touches the out-of-bounds line. It's gotten her called a couple of times for being out of bounds, especially against UAB. She got I think it was back-to-back plays where she got the ball and she was out of bounds. It's just an interesting stance, probably something that needs to be cleaned up a little bit more. Yeah. But it's hard to want to tell her to clean that up when she's shooting so well from three-point line. If she's providing all this, so
she provides that spark when she comes in.
Yeah, and I think Asia was the freshman of the week here for the AAC this past week. Again, I wasn't expecting some of these freshmen to come in and provide this type of play, but it's been so exciting to see them grow. Even Emma Lucio, she has had some limited playing time. She's kind of seen it ramp up here in conference a little bit more. She kind of shows those sparks. I think the difference between Emma and our other two freshmen right now is just that for Emma, it looks like the game is still going too fast.
Yeah, so occasionally she almost looks like she's skipping because she gets a little too excited when she's in there on the court.
Exactly. She rushes a little bit too much. Something that I think you see it from time to time with Asia, but it's starting to kind of slow down. You kind of see her taking her time a little bit more. And Adara, obviously, it's even slower. But it's kind of interesting to see just a spectrum with these three freshmen.
Yeah, and I think Karen Aston probably wouldn't have guessed either at the beginning of the season that she'd have two freshmen that have both been freshmen of the week. I mean, you mentioned Asia Proctor, but Adara Udo's also had that, honor a couple of weeks ago. So, I mean, that's huge to see two freshmen getting accolades like that in our first year at American Conference.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, again, these are all the good things that we've seen as we've watched most of these games. Now let's talk about some things that we do need to clean up here. I thought there was an interesting quote from Coach Aston after the Temple game. It was a tough loss, but she had said, Temple had quite a few guards and wings off the bench that could make tough shots, and UTSA doesn't. Yes and no. I think there are some tough guards and wings on the UTSA team. I think it's just drawing out the consistency. And I think that's really what Coach Aston was trying to get at was, we do have some tough guards, we do have some tough wings, but they just need to be more consistent when hitting tough, come in and hit tough shots. And, I think we've kind of already mentioned it before, but we need to figure out this fouling.
Yeah.
That is one part of this game that I think has been crucial to kind of derailing the team a little bit at times, where they just get a little careless. Like I said before, they're aggressive, so it kind of leads to a propensity to get some cheap fouls. It also, though, gives them an opportunity to create turnovers and get this team kind of moving in the right direction. So it's just being much more aware of how they position their body and what they do.
Yeah, and then on the flip side of that, we're currently the worst free throw shooting team in the conference. So when the fouls come our way or the calls come our way, we're not taking full advantage. I mean, we've been shooting somewhere around 56% as a team. So we're leaving a lot of points on the board when we do get that opportunity on the other end.
And that goes back to the game against UAB. Something you had said, we just couldn't essentially extend the lead enough to really put UAB away. And that's really what it came down to. The announcers for UAB repeatedly said that over and over. If this gets into a close game, UTSA is the worst free throw shooting team in the conference. And there were moments where they didn't hit their free throws and they had some bad shots they took, but it wasn't taken into the hoop. And that really caused, I think, overall problems. But so things that I think they're going to want to clean up, obviously, I think Coach Aston has even said that it's things they got to work on, but still a lot of really bright spots, a lot of good players on this team, and they're just continuing to get even more talented.
Absolutely. And one of the questions that we've had really for the rest of the season is, when is Jordan coming back? And at this point, it's almost the question if Jordan's coming back. I mean, you'd almost think at this point, this far into the season, that maybe she's going to take a medical red shirt.
That's a fair point. I mean, obviously we don't have any inside info saying she's definitely coming back. All we've heard is whatever Coach Aston has reported, which was, probably around the beginning of conference, and then we didn't see Jordan at all. So I think what made it more difficult was the fact that this team is playing well.
Right.
Without her. And like I kind of mentioned before, they've kind of grown because she hasn't sort of been there. It's not to say that they wouldn't have grown with her, but you get more minutes for some of these players, and it gives them much more opportunity to shine. And
and at this point, I mean, obviously we don't know what the situation is with her health, but on the one hand, you almost look at it like, well, that would give us one more season with her. We're playing well this year, but can you imagine how good it would be next year if she comes back and she's fully healthy?
Right. I mean, we're perplexed by it, but we don't have to make that decision. I'm pretty sure it's even more difficult for Coach Aston and the coaching staff, and even Jordan herself. Like, is she going to try to test it? I mean, I would imagine there'd probably be some minutes restrictions if she came back. So, once again, it's that flow of what they've already created throughout the whole season. Essentially 18 games in already, it's hard to want to mess up that chemistry that they've really put together. But, you could always use a scorer like Jordan, to either come off the bench or even provide some sort of spark. So,
but as we talk about the future, we did hear today about some of our early signees for this season.
Yes, we did.
And it sounds like from just these three girls, the future is definitely bright.
Let's start with Mia Hammonds, 6'3" guard out of Steele. When I saw that she had signed, I was actually pretty excited because I had gotten the Dave Campbell's Texas basketball preview magazine, and so I was kind of flipping through, and I see that she signs, and I look to see, the top players in the state, and she happens to be number 21, in the state of Texas, but she's number 4 here in San Antonio. So, getting some of the top ballers, obviously, it felt exciting to me that area baller was actually considering UTSA, because it felt like just a couple of seasons ago that wouldn't have been the case.
Right.
Mia seems to come and add some height, some length, some athleticism to this team, which, is something that we kind of talked about with the coaching staff before, just off the record, just talking to them and seeing like what the team looked like. They kept saying over and over, we wish they were a little older. Like, they just want to hurry up this kind of maturity process because they're good, but they feel like they can hit, the sky's the limit essentially. So adding Mia Hammonds is going to be obviously really good. Also adding Taylor Ross, a 6'1" forward out of Brennan High School. She's number 30 in Texas, 5th in the SA area. It's just big. I mean, again, just talking about the San Antonio area and getting some of the top players is really big for this program. It was big for football. It's going to be big for our UTSA women's program. Right. And last but not least is Damara Allen, a 5'10" guard out of Aurora, Colorado. Again, adding some height, adding a little bit more to your guards and wings. Coach Aston has talked about the fact that losing, obviously Kira White's going to be big. You're losing a player that has been, as I said already, the Swiss Army knife. So how do you replace her? Well, you need to bring in some more guards and wings to do so. And I think seeing these three players, it's just stacking more talent in and just making this team much more competitive internally, which will, you think you're going to get a better product externally here as they, take the court. So really excited to see what happens with this team moving forward.
So up next, the women right now, they're just outside that top third of the conference. They've already beat Charlotte, who is currently number 1 in the conference, and then South Florida, which was, the conference winner the last couple of years. But we have to play some of the other teams that are ranked above us in the near future. We've got SMU on the road on Saturday, 2 p.m. Then we're back in the combo on Wednesday, January 31st, 6 p.m. against North Texas. So, the schedule is not going to get any easier, but hopefully some of these big wins will carry them through with some momentum. And that hopefully they can kind of set aside that heartbreaker at UAB.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another thing is February 4th, when we're playing Tulane, the Runners Rising NIL Collective has a challenge going on. So if you're interested in supporting the women, you can pledge to donate $1 for every point scored in that game.
big. I mean, we're obviously going to take that challenge, but it would be great if we could get as many people to do so. It's a good team, and it's for a great cause, and it's just one of our teams. We've got another team, the men's basketball team that can certainly also use support. So let's start talking about them. Okay. Obviously, preseason, they were picked to finish last. A lot of it was the unknown.
Right.
What is this team going to look like, right? The two of us just kind of were perplexed. Like, we don't know. We see these players coming in. We just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, you could look at them in their individual stats, but until you see them all collectively, we didn't really know what to expect. And, I think before we get into this year's team, it's worth noting there were a lot of concerns when we did have so many players hit the transfer portal last year. And I think probably in the beginning of the season when the team was starting to have some struggles, there was probably some folks that thought, well, if we would have been able to keep XYZ player, maybe things would have looked different, or lamenting some of those losses.
Right.
And certainly some of the guys that left have gone on to have some success. For instance, John Buggs, he's at North Texas. But most of these guys that have moved on haven't seen that level of success that they had at UTSA. And even John Buggs hasn't had the same amount of success that he had when he was at UTSA. I mean, he's shooting 7.2 points per game now versus 10 last season. So, I think it's just when you go back and you kind of look at last year's team, there are probably a multitude of reasons why those guys left. But I don't know that we should really sit back and lament the majority of them leaving. Buggs, Medor, I think you can probably make an argument for, but you're not seeing, somebody walk away from the basketball team and go to a higher level school or just have some breakout season. So, I think it's just more important to say, okay, look, they left, it happened, let's really focus on the guys that we have.
I think because we had no idea what this team looked like, when we started watching them play, just kind of jumping off what you just said, it really felt like this team is actually much more talented than the team from last season. I think we've got some better outside shooting, a little bit more consistent outside shooting, scoring, and we got a little bit of size. Yeah. And it was kind of interesting because, you felt like some of these guys just felt like cast-offs. They just felt like guys that nobody else wanted. And even in talking with some of these guys, in the preseason, they were telling us, like, we didn't feel wanted. And then, Coach Henson or Coach Peck, any of the other coaches on the bench essentially made them feel wanted, got them here, and these guys are playing well. They've had some good moments, and I would say more good moments than I thought would be seen, especially from the preseason, right?
Yeah, certainly. I think the level of talent, like you said, for this team is higher than last team, but unfortunately, just because we've also increased or we've jumped to a new conference, the record just doesn't really reflect that. Right.
It's going to always be hard, especially for a team to come together like this,
this quickly, yeah.
Yeah, we saw these issues with a team like Colorado in football. Brought in, they had that really early success and then all of a sudden fell apart. You saw Texas State, who, while they had a winning record, man, that last month or so, they really struggled in some games. And it's chemistry. They're just not used to playing together. And, in those tough moments, those clutch moments, they're not used to knowing where everybody is at. And because of it, you can revamp a team by just, essentially redoing the entire roster, but you're going to have chemistry issues. And really, I think that's what it's come down to with this team. Because we had to revamp the entire team, you have a close loss to UAB at home, 78-76 from the last time we updated this. Took them for a ride in Memphis. We lost 107-101 in overtime. And then just yesterday, playing FAU, lost 112-103 in overtime. Each time, though, even though they pressed these ranked teams and really got close to winning, to me it was the chemistry. It was not knowing where all these guys are at and just kind of depending on one-on-one at times. Things that you've seen from Henson teams. And I don't want to make it seem like that's completely terrible, because that put us in a position to, almost upset, Memphis and FAU. But it also just kind of lends the fact that if we had some better organization, maybe we actually pull these off. And then we're talking, okay, what are we going to do about this coaching staff? Because now they pulled off some 2 big upsets, right? One on the road, one at home. It really gets a little more interesting, I think, to talk about. Let's talk real quick, though, about season improvements. Overall, there's a lot of similarities between this team and last team statistically. But one big thing is the points per game. They did really jump 10 points per game this season than they did last season. And really, to me, what seems like a pretty much similar type of schedule. I mean, it hasn't been like, oh, this one was overly easy. I'd say both seasons, it's been a manageable non-conference schedule going into conference. Defensively, unfortunately, we're giving up about 5 points more per game. But I think you're also seeing, this team, I think, doing better when it comes to block shots. Because of it, they've kind of lowered the overall shooting percentage from their opponents. It still, though, doesn't really get you out of the bottom third of the conference.
Right.
There's some struggles. And a lot of it, whereas the women have a really aggressive, strong defensive philosophy, the men really don't. Right. And because of it, obviously I just said, they've jumped up about 5 points per game from last season. And it doesn't really give them the chance to win. Yeah. But I think you can also argue that because they've jumped up in terms of scoring, the offense has given them a better chance to win. So, just need a little bit more complimentary basketball here.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at in terms of our scoring and our offensive stats, we lead the conference in 3-pointers per game, about 10 on average. That's 16th nationally. And we also lead the conference in points off the bench. And a large part of that, we'll talk about that individual in just a second. But, one of the challenges is we do tend to get a little streaky at times when it comes to our 3-point shooting. And so because we don't have that strong defensive play, if the threes aren't hitting, then it really puts us, in a bind, and we go through these scoring droughts and we can't stop the other team from scoring. So it just kind of makes it a bigger hole for us to dig out of at some point.
And it's tough to watch because you have a women's team that is using their defense to keep them in games when they go into dry spells, but the men just can't rely on their defense to do so.
Right.
So again, I think that defensive philosophy, I think it's obviously one of the things we've keyed on. But I think the story of this season, and what the person you alluded to just a minute ago,
the return of Jordan Ivy Curry.
Juice. Yeah, it's been. I think you kind of talked to me, off the pod and mentioned you thought that there was a little more maturity in his game coming back from, he went to Pacific for a season and then transferred back. And, to you've seen like a lot of assets to a game that seem to have really elevated from Juice from the last time he played here at UTSA.
Yeah, I mean, certainly he's, been able to score quite a bit. I mean, against FAU, he had a career high of 38 points. That was also the most points any individual player on our team has scored since 2020.
Yeah.
But initially when he came back, you saw him doing a better job at kind of distributing the ball. Now, it's also kind of flipped a little bit, and I almost wonder if, that was kind of maybe something that he picked up a little bit from his play at Pacific. And then as we've gotten into these, tougher contests or these closer games, if maybe he's getting feedback on coaching to kind of change it a little bit. And I say that because, at the very end of the game, I think right before they were going to potentially, they could win it or go into overtime at FAU. And you saw Jordan, kind of kick the ball out to Carlton, and Carlton took a shot and missed it. And in one of the post-game interviews, Henson mentioned, almost made it sound like he wished Juice would have just kept the ball and shot it himself. So again, it almost kind of makes you think like, okay, well, maybe he was coming in, being more willing to distribute. And then, he's been giving kind of feedback like, hey, you're the hot shooter, so keep the ball and, try to score more.
And the tough part there is that the fact that that the defense was going to key on Juice, because essentially
he is the top scorer, yeah.
He comes in and he's essentially got the green light. It feels like he touches the ball and nobody else was really going to see it. He's going to make a move and score. And he's been doing a pretty good job of scoring. Thing is doing it consistently. Mm-hmm. And I think just continuing to be a distributor, as you mentioned, I think is going to be huge. I think he also needs to, honestly, defensively, he can't fall asleep. He tends to fall asleep at times. And, FAU hit a key 3-pointer to really extend the lead in overtime because he started looking to his left and was watching the play over there and forgot about his man who was to his right on the 3-point line and ended up an open 3-pointer. Again, game just got out of reach. But it's those moments right there where you just hope that it's also not just him tiring out because of the fact that, essentially he's been given the ball. Like I said, he just goes and he scores.
Right.
I think the evolution needs to be that, he obviously does what he did at the end of the game. And I know that you said that Henson wanted to have him, take that last shot. But you felt like he made the right pass. He got it to him wide open Carlton Lingard. So what more can you ask, right?
Yeah, and, it happens, right? Sometimes guys have a wide open shot and they miss.
Yeah, it just happens. Somebody else I want to talk about is Christian Tucker. I mean, I feel like he's just like a little firecracker. We've kind of we've made poked some fun at him at his outbursts at soccer games. He's quite vocal. If you ever go to a soccer game, Christian's there because he's yelling at the refs. He's letting them know, don't let those opponents mess with our girls. But I think one of the things I've been really encouraged about with Christian is the fact that he's actually been such a good playmaker. Mm-hmm. He's really gotten this offense kind of going. Kind of like we have the women who need Sydney Love to really get going. The team, I think, to me, is better when Tuck is running the offense and moving guys around and distributing. This team was on the cusp of beating FAU yesterday because of the fact that when he had the ball, he was able to find guys open near the hoop. Mm-hmm. He's probably a guy that you usually have coming off the bench. But in this UTSA system, it's hard to deny the fact that how valuable he is to this team. So if you're looking at the MVP of, the UTSA men's team, while the return of Juice has been great, I think it's all about Tuck. Yeah, the guy that stayed, right?
He is leading the conference in assists per game, and free throw percentage.
I mean, what else can you ask for, right? Yeah. I mean, this is a guy that I like coming off the bench the last couple seasons because of his defense and his kind of just this kind of bullish way that he, asserted himself on the court, and it's tough not to love that.
And you also gotta love the fact that he can kind of poke fun at things, the whole TikTok he did that they sort of made into the entry for basketball where you see him in the locker room calling the guys where you at? Yeah.
I mean, all those things, but it's the things that he does leadership wise, right? And that's really what it is, having the fun with it, getting the guys together. Last guy we got to talk about real quick is Carlton Lingard, I think from the veterans. Obviously first season he's playing, he's been here, at least a season, couldn't play last season. He's a sort of an enigma to me because defensively he has those moments, but because you don't really have a really good defensive strategy, he leads the team in block shots, but man, it feels like they could do a little bit more with him defensively. And offensively, I just feel like he doesn't go to the hoop enough. He doesn't rush the rim. Again, I feel like Tuck having the ball and just throwing a few lobs to Carlton for some easy dunks, I know sounds easy in theory, but if you're good offensively, those should be just staples within the offense.
Yeah, Carlton feels much more comfortable taking 3-point shots. It's not necessarily his strength if you look at his stats, but that's where he's comfortable. And you just kind of wish at times he would use his size. It's we were listening to the Rice game, and they kept saying, oh, he likes to play the European game. He likes to shoot, 3-pointers. And it's like, you just want him to, like, go to the basket and kind of create a shot for himself from time to time instead of, like, stopping and trying to take a 3-pointer, which may or may not go in.
Yeah, and that would get him to the line, too. I mean, that's the big thing here, is to push the other team into foul trouble. Mm-hmm. And I think Lingard could do that. Just, I think, an area of growth that he needs. Now, I don't know how much more eligibility he has left, but, right. If this is it, it's going to be hard to see him, I think, transform his game, to another level come the rest of this season because of the fact that at this point, it's just going to be hard to take some of these habits out of him. But sure, I mean, I would love to see him, obviously, like I said, go to the hoop. He's got some nice moves at times down low that he's gotten some easy baskets. And when you see him really thrive, he's able to get some of those easy baskets, mm-hmm. but they're just not enough. It does feel like, even when I was looking at, his shot attempts, it felt, I think I calculated like 45% or 45 to 49% of his overall shots are 3-pointers. And he only shoots, I think, like 33%.
Right.
So it's tough to really justify, why are you out there shooting? Like, right. that really shouldn't be the play. Now, you were talking about some physicality from Lingard. Masal Diouf is one of my favorite guys out there.
Yep.
Because he goes and he's bullish. He's physical. He knocks around the big guys. But one of the guys that I'm really missing is Adante Holloman. I think that's really affected this team at times, especially with ball handling, because I think Juice has had to take some of that, some of those responsibilities over. And Holloman really, I think, to me, provided a nice kind of playmaking spark when he was in the game. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we haven't gotten to see a lot of him.
Yeah, he's been injured, and it sounds like he's kind of day-to-day now, so hopefully we'll get to see him soon again.
Yeah, because even Coach Henson kind of mentioned, post-game, FAU, that they really could have used, Holloman in there and, kind of spell them a little bit, give them some more playmaking. I think he sees it. I just don't know how he kind of turns it around once all this is going. But as much as we've talked about these players, some of the things we like, let's talk a couple of issues that we have. We still struggle defensively. And we've already kind of mentioned a lot of it. We mm-hmm. struggle defensively. It's just the fact that they can't seem to buckle down. There's right. no changing of defenses. And when Henson has changed the defense, this team does much better. But it's curious to me because it tends to happen a lot against the two ranked teams we played. They played really well against Memphis and FAU, and it seems like he was changing the defense then. It wasn't just the standard man-to-man, half-court man-to-man, half-court man-to-man. You've got to change it up. Coach Ashton does it, and it provides a spark for the women. Other teams do it. It provides a spark for them. There's got to be some more to this defensive game. Otherwise, it's just the same old, same old.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I feel like we play up to our competition at times,
yeah.
but we need to play up to all of the teams that we play.
Great point. Yes, because, you then can look back at a game like Army, which a bad Army team, and we just, they looked like they were checked out, like they were ready to go home.
But coming off of a great game against Oregon State.
Right.
You had this, and that was really the first game where you thought, wow, they can be a really different team. And then, they get frustrated, they get in their head, they come back and have a really rough game against Army. And then you see it again where it's like they have this great game against Memphis and, you're kind of feeling like, okay, great, we're going to be different. And then, we struggle the next game. So it's just, I think they've got to figure out that consistency as well, and they've got to be able to play that same level every single game, not just when they're getting excited for these big competitors.
That's a really good point, and I think offensively they got to do a better job, I'd say, of not just settling for 3-point shots. It's just there's just too many 3-point shots. It ends up being 45% of the shots they take, but nobody is even close to 38% overall 3-point shooting. Right. So yes, these guys can shoot, but if that's not really their strength, like, let's just take it to the basket. If you contrast that with the women's team, the women, 25% of their overall shots are 3-point shots. They focus on going to the basket. They focus on some outside, perimeter shots, and it really kind of opens up their game. Now, obviously this is the way that Henson likes to play, but it's just not this. To me, it's just not the strength, and the numbers show that. Obviously, there's some. It feels like the same issues that we've talked about with Henson for like the last upteenth years. Obviously, a lot of questions around Coach Henson, and his future going forward. And a big question going forward, I think the rest of the season is, can they find that defensive identity? I don't think they can, because this just hasn't been Coach Henson's strength. And it's unfortunate, because for everything that we've laid out in terms of this team, in terms of their, the talent that they have, and, the fact that they can, get in a rhythm shooting-wise, it just feels like they have an opportunity to do some more special things and kind of provide a little spark like the women's team has, but it's just not there.
Yeah, the second half of their season is going to continue to be a challenge, but they've got some winnable games against the teams that are in that middle to the bottom of the conference. We're going to play Rice again. We beat Rice in overtime. We've got Temple, Wichita State, ECU. I say Tulsa because, we did play them once, but they're still, again, we struggled against one of the bottom teams, even though we played well against the top. So they really need to take advantage and play up to this level of play above this level of competition, play like they're playing Memphis and FAU when they play these kind of middle of the rung teams, so that they can build confidence, because they do still have Charlotte, North Texas, and SMU, which are all three, in the top 5 of the conference. And, they're going to have those big games that they still have to face, and you want them to be able to get over the hump and beat one of those top tier teams instead of just playing them, tight into overtime. But their big test is going to come Wednesday, 7 p.m. at home. They're playing Tulane. Tulane is really not far above us in the standings, but they did what we didn't do, and they beat Memphis. So I think this is going to be the real test for them. Can you put it all together? Can you play competitively against Tulane?
And if it becomes that spark for the rest of the season, then great.
Yeah.
I think it'll energize this fan base. I think just a lot of people are obviously checked out. They don't. It's obviously Coach Henson has been the reason for it, but hopefully we've outlined the fact that there are some really good bright spots on this men's team. And sure, they're going to have rough nights. They're going to have some rough moments. It's going to happen. Regardless of how talented our team was, there's going to be rough moments. But I'm with you. I think they can meet this challenge with Tulane. Hopefully it sparks them going forward, and they can take care of some of these lower rung teams, as you mentioned, and get some easy wins, and maybe make a run at that tournament. And I'm talking about the conference tournament. I'm not talking about NCAA tournament. I'm talking about make a run at this tournament and just see how much more fun we can have with this season.
Absolutely. All right, before we go, let's talk a little bit about UTSA soccer.
Okay.
They recently announced that they hired a new assistant coach, Rob McCann. He spent 2 years as the ECNL director at the Albion Hurricane Soccer Club in Houston. Might be pronouncing that wrong. Had a key role in not only the team, but also the staff selection and player development. So how do you kind of see this hire fitting in with, the rest of Coach Pittman's staff?
It's kind of interesting, right? Because the other ones have been sort of, typical assistants from other schools that he kind of poached after his assistants were poached. I kind of like this Rob McCann hire because of the fact that there's a lot here about him and his player development and the way he's kind of seeing players. But even more so is the fact that this is really one of the top soccer clubs in the Houston area, and because of it, that gives you sort of that into Houston, right? Like, there really hasn't been, I think, too much where it comes to UTSA getting a lot of Houston area players. So it might be strategic here in getting a voice or someone that knows some of these young women that are playing out there and recruiting them, or at least giving them a look. I talked about earlier with Coach Aston and how she's kind of now gotten some of the local area San Antonio girls to start looking at UTSA as an option to play basketball at. Trying to poach from, we've done a good job of going up to the metro area, the DFW metro area, I should say. Now let's see if we can get Houston. Big cities usually have some really good players and really some overlooked players. So here's a chance to really continue improving this team. Now, as we say we're going to want to improve this team, we do have to say that there are some players that left.
Yeah. Zoe Lamb has transferred to Tarleton.
Oh, look at you.
I know. So we will still be following Zoe Lamb because I am also a Tarleton alum. So, kind of excited for her. She's likely going to get more playing time at Tarleton.
Yeah.
They're entering their third season of having women's soccer. So she'll be able to really bring a lot of experience, I think, to them. And that's probably what they're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kendall Gooner transferred to the University of Tampa. And Marley Frey is using her last year of eligibility to transfer to Oral Roberts.
Interesting. These teams are getting some pretty good players. Good chance for them to get some more minutes, as you said, and continue developing their game. A lot of these girls could continue to potentially go to maybe Europe and play a little bit. So excited to see them kind of continue their careers. Two other names not with the team anymore are Thady Reichenmeiser and Holland Winton. I would say that both really didn't give much of an impact last season, but still worthy of just noting that they're no longer with the UTSA soccer team.
Yeah, and not sure, if either one of them is playing somewhere else. We just, didn't really see any updates or announcements other than they're not on the spring roster.
Yeah. Now, we've talked about who's left. Let's talk about who's coming in because, I really felt like Coach Pittman kind of silently, and I say silently because there's, usually there's not a lot of fanfare for most UTSA fans in terms of the soccer team. For us, though, they kind of catch an eye, especially because I keep telling you, we should keep an eye out on this.
Right.
So let's talk about some of the November signees. You have an outside back and winger in Allie Allen, a midfielder in Bree Kerrigan. I think both of them are essentially high schoolers. We have a forward in Isabella, I'm not even going to say this name correctly, but it sounds like Gennario. She's from Edmonton, Alberta. A forward in Addie Johnson, a center back in Isabel Peters, and a forward in Brooke Vickers, also from Richmond, British Columbia. So a couple of international flavor there. But you start seeing the fact that Coach Pittman is starting to look for some scorers, trying to enhance this team and make sure that they can score some goals because this defense, while wonderful last season, they just struggled to score.
Right.
So 6 signees in November. We have some signees in December. Just about all of them a lot of them were just transfers. I'll start with forward Izzy Lane from London, England. She's a Delaware transfer. She's a spring enrollee. Forward Luli McFarland from Vancouver, British Columbia. She's a Memphis transfer. Also a spring enrollee. Defender Zoe May from Ottawa, Ontario. Memphis transfer. It's interesting. Getting some Memphis transfers here. We have Addie O'Kelly, a midfielder from Cincinnati, and then Riley Lowe, a defender from Tarleton.
Yeah, it almost kind of feels like we made a trade with Tarleton.
Yeah.
They got Zoe, we got Riley. It's just sort of interesting. I mean, how many times do you see one student transferring out to one school and then another one transferring in from that same school?
Yeah, again, looking at some, international flavor here. There's a lot of players that have playmaking skills in the limited time or limited information that I saw from some of these guys. And again, you start thinking about how this team looked and how it's going to continue to transform and elevate in terms of AAC play. They did pretty well last season in terms of AAC play. They didn't make it into the tournament, but it was still a good performance from this team. And as they continue to kind of move off of some of the CUSA level players, you're going to see this team continue to, I think, look and reach for the sky in terms of the potential because, I think Coach Pittman is a very good coach. I think we're lucky at UTSA to have him and hopefully he continues to build this program. And these I'm excited for these signings. I think there's some good talent here, so hopefully we can bring them all in and they can make a good impact next season.
Yeah, absolutely. We should be getting in the next couple of weeks the schedule for the spring exhibition games for soccer. So as soon as that information's out, we'll make sure to share that, because we'll be attending those games so we can kind of scout out some of our team ahead of time.
Absolutely.
All right, well, I think that about wraps it up for us here on the Hail Married podcast. I'm Atos.
And I'm the Toes.
We'll be back soon with some more basketball coverage and football updates in the spring.
Birds up.